Welcome, friends, to the Ames Free Library. Every year, the Parkview first graders get a tour of our library. They have a walking field trip from their school, and they're fortunate enough to be able to come right here and see all the parts of the library, even the cool stuff that you wouldn't see on a normal visit to the library. So we are going to visit all of the departments. We're going to learn a little bit about the history of the library, and you're going to even see that mysterious third floor that you've probably always wondered about. So we're going to start right here in front of the library. If you have ever even driven by, you know that this is just a beautiful building in the heart of our downtown, and you might wonder a little bit about it. So maybe you have heard of someone called Henry Hobson Richardson. We even have a school in town named after him. Well, he was an architect. And an architect, as you might know, is somebody who designs buildings. He didn't come over here with his hammer and his saw and actually build this building, but he designed it. He drew the pictures, and he had this imagination for what he wanted our building to look like. So he was the architect. He wanted to make this look something a little more than a pile of stones just sitting on top of each other. So as you look at the building, you might see some really cool details. And I'll point out a few as we go. We really want to start right here with this arch that comes up right over what used to be the main entrance of our library. We don't use this door anymore, but this used to be the spot where people would walk right in and come through this arch to visit the wonders inside the library. So in this arch, we've got some details. We start over here on my right side with a bird. And if you look really closely, maybe you can tell that's a rooster. And the rooster welcomes the day. If you've ever heard a rooster, if you've ever spent some time on a farm, you know they wake you right up at the crack of dawn. So the rooster is Dawn. And as you follow the arch right up to the top, on each side, you've got a couple of little dragons. And those dragons are the hot fire, the hot sun that take you through the midday hours. And as you come all the way down on the other side, of course, we work our way into evening, and this is the owl who stays up all night, keeps us company through the evening hours. And so not only is this a really cool looking space to come into the library, but we've got a little storytelling before you even get into the library. Now, this library was designed by Henry Hobson Richardson, but it was a gift to our town from Oliver Ames. Oliver Ames was a businessman, an industrialist, a railroad builder, and he built a shovel factory. So his company made shovels right here in town. In fact, where we stand right here in front of the library, his factory was right across the street. So the old shovel shop still stands, simply with a different purpose today. And Oliver and his family did a whole lot for this town. The shovel works manufactured shovels, but also tools that were used during the Civil War, during the War of 1812, during the California Gold Rush. They were actually used in building the Transcontinental Railroad. So not only does he have an impact here in our town of Easton, but even throughout the country and the history of how our country was built and came to be what we know today. So our library was opened on March 10th, 1883. This library is a little over 135 years old, so when you walk through our doors, you're walking into a little slice of history. The library was designed by the architect Henry Hobson Richardson, but the grounds, which again, if you've been here to the library and you've ever walked around outside, particularly in our garden out back, those were designed by Frederick Law Olmsted, another familiar name you might know from our school here in town. Now let's go inside and check out what that's all about. I like to start my tour inside here in the children's room. So we have come into the library and we are here on the second floor. This is my home base here in the library, and this is the space with which our first grade friends are probably most familiar. So the children's room here opened on November 10th, 1931. So at the time, children weren't entirely welcome in libraries in a lot of spaces. They were just becoming welcome in libraries. We'll talk about more in a minute. But when this was built, it was a whole innovative new idea to have a space for children in the library. And when it was built over 80 years ago, they really did a lot of looking forward. So we have plenty of room for shelves, lots of big wide open windows, and it's a very welcoming space for families and children. The children's room was a gift from Fanny Holt Ames in memory of her husband, William Hadwin Ames. Now, William was a son of Oliver Ames. He was born in 1861, and Fanny was his second wife, and when he died, he left his money to her. And she decided that that money would be best spent adding the children's room onto the library. So it is thanks to them that we have this wonderful space just for kids here in our library. So now we're here in the barrel vault room. This barrel vault room was one of the original parts of the library. It was, in fact, the main part of the library when it opened in 1885. Now, when it opened, it was open to all residents of Easton as long as you were at least 14 years of age. Now, kids, does that sound fair? I don't think so. This is what I meant by saying that kids were not originally welcome in libraries. Lots of kids didn't go to school. Lots of kids were not taught how to read, so there was no purpose for them in a library space. So before that time, children were not welcome in libraries, and all of the books in here were only written for adults. So we were very fortunate in 1931, when the children's room came along, that we got that wonderful space. And these days, all of you are welcome in the library anytime. But here in the barrel vault room, anyone was allowed as long as they were 14 years of age, as long as they were residents of Easton, and they were only allowed to get one book out at a time. But what made it very, very different from our library experience today is that the librarian would sit right at the front of this room, and not only were they in the way with their desk, but there was actually a little fence. There was a grate in front of the librarian, and patrons were not allowed to come into this space. This space was very sacred. It was strictly for the librarians. So you could approach the librarian, let them know what you were interested in, what you were looking for. If you had something you wanted, you could write it on a little slip of paper and pass it off to the librarian. And the librarian was the only one who would be allowed to come in and actually select your book off the shelf. And they would bring that back and return that and check that out to you. So, very different system than what we know now. It went that way until about 1932, when the stacks were open to patrons and people could come in and choose their own books. They could actually browse the collection, see what was here, and then pull their own books off the shelf. Now, if you look up in this room, you'll see it's called the barrel vault room because there is this amazing ceiling. You actually feel like you're in the inside of a barrel. It's really cool. So if you look at the ceiling, there are lots of details. There aren't just, again, just like the outside. Instead of just a pile of stones, instead of just a ceiling, we have a beautiful space with lots of carved details. There are swirls, and there are whorls, and there are columns that go through this room. It was all designed very intentionally by a man named Stanford White. So the ceiling is made of butternut wood, which grows along the East Coast, and it's a nice soft wood. It's very easy to carve. So it was a pretty natural choice for this space. But don't you think it took a lot of work to make all these details in this room? It's very impressive if you take the time to look around and really see all the work that went into this space. When this space opened up in 1932 for patrons to come and choose their own books, they still were not allowed in the balcony upstairs. That was still a very special space that was just for the librarians. But in 1944, they did open that space and make it available to patrons so they could go even into the balcony space to choose their books. That's not open anymore. We now use that space just for storage. It's not entirely safe, especially since we do have children in the library. But it is still an impressive space, just like the rest of this, with the beautiful carvings and all the intricate details that went into that space. When this library opened, back in 1883, there were 10,000 books in the library. Today, we now have more than 60,000 items in the library. About 40,000 of those are books, and about 20,000 of those books are children's books. So we've come a long way from when we opened to where we are today. Now, just across from us here, from the barrel vault room, we have the fireplace room. In the fireplace room, no kids were allowed in that space, even after kids were allowed in the library. No kids were allowed in that space until 1977. That was a space that was very silent. It was just for adults who were here to be serious and to get their work done. We still like this space to be a little quiet space, but we're a lot more flexible. Now, over the fireplace there, which is a beautifully carved fireplace, there is a picture of a man. Now have a look at him for a minute. I'm going to let you guys have a second to think. Who do you think that might be? I'm going to tell you. Lots of kids love to guess Abraham Lincoln. Well, not a bad guess, but that is actually Oliver Ames. So that is our patron of the library who got us all started here. And the fireplace itself was designed by Sanford White, who also designed the ceiling and all the details in that barrel vault room. Next, I'm going to take you up this secret special staircase. Have you ever wondered what's behind this velvet rope? Well, now you will know. It's really just a couple of offices and where I eat my lunch. But there are some cool things to learn about the third floor. Originally, when this library was designed, the librarian actually lived up here in the building. So until about the 1960s, the first librarian of the library, Mary Lamprey, used to live in this apartment. So when she would wake up in the morning, she'd get her day started and go right downstairs to work. Pretty cool way to start your day, I think. Mary Lamprey lived here in this space. She was a librarian here at the library for over 50 years. She started working here in 1891 and retired in 1944. Now at the time, because she'd been the librarian here for so long, she actually stayed living here in the apartment through the rest of her life. So even though she was no longer working here, this had always been her home, and the new librarian was not planning on living here in the library. So it was pretty easy for her to just stay up here. So that's a really neat little piece of history you might not have known. Not only did the librarian live up here, but she even had a little dog while she lived here. So this space we're standing in right here was her living room. She actually had a piano just set right against the windows over here. Her bedroom was here in the corner behind us, and her tiny little dining room is now another office. So very neat to think of somebody actually living in this space. Also pretty neat to think about how easy it would be to get to work when all you have to do is go downstairs. Another feature of this room that we have here today are a lot of photos representing both the library's history and the Ames family history. So one of the recent additions to this room, we have a couple of gorgeous black and white photos of the library taken by a local photographer, Eric Lothrop. And those are featured, there are lots of his photos actually featuring different parts around town, and we are lucky enough to have some of his here in the library. There's another photo from our garden space outside. There is a stage. Many of you may have come to some of our summer programs outside where we have performers up on the stage, and we have a great old time with a whole bunch of families out there. Well, that started as a stage for the high school drama club. So the photo here is from a presentation of A Midsummer Night's Dream. So we're sticking with our literature with Shakespeare, and we put it out on stage out there. That was a pretty neat time, all the way from back in 1916. So that space has been used as a presentation space and a dramatic space for a very long time now. Another photo that well, actually this is a painting, certainly not a photo. It is actually from the 1600s, or it is of a man who lived in the 1600s. This is a picture of the Reverend William Ames. He was actually the first one from the Ames family who crossed the Atlantic and came to settle his family in the US from England. Now, unfortunately, he actually got sick and he died before he made it here to the United States. So the rest of his family came across, and that Ames family became who we know now today, who gave us this library here. The next photo we have over here is just a photograph of the carving of Oliver Ames, which we talked about on the fireplace room downstairs. Around the corner here is a nice photo of Mary Ames Frothingham. She was the daughter of Frederick Lothrop Ames, and she served on the library board here for 59 years and was even the president of the board from 1929 until 1955. Next over, we have a picture of her father, Frederick Lothrop Ames, who was the first president of the library. He actually worked with H.H. Richardson and helped the library come from his father's dream to reality. The first librarian of the library was Charles Ballard. He was the first librarian. He served for about 8 years, and he got the library from an empty building to a vibrant space full of books. But the one who really made a difference was the next librarian, and that was Mary Lavinia Lamprey. Now, that is the librarian who lived here in in the library during her tenure as librarian, and this picture that we have here shows her sitting at her piano at that space between the two front windows. William Hadwin Ames, now I've mentioned him before. This is another photograph of him. He was the children's room is named after him. So he had left the money to his second wife, Fanny, and she is the one who donated the money to build that children's room. So we are all indebted to him for that wonderful space. And this one here is a picture of Helen Angier Ames. She was also a child of Oliver Ames, and she was instrumental, though she did not serve at the library, she was very instrumental into helping build the collection and supporting her brother, who was Frederick Ames, who was that first president of the library. And she did a lot to get this library's collection all built up again, to make this from an empty building to that wonderful, vibrant library that we know today. So these are a few of the instrumental characters from our past who have created what we know now as the Ames Free Library. So we're going to take you on a ride down the elevator all the way back down from the third floor where we are to the first floor. The elevator is always a highlight for our visiting first graders. As you can see, not only is it beautifully papered, but you get to watch out the window as you go down, which is a particular thrill. Now the downstairs area here was originally a basement. If you have been on the first floor very much, you know that the ceilings are quite low. But in 2009, it was renovated to become a functional space, and it gave us a whole lot more room to work with in the library here. Right now, we are in what we call our receiving room. So when we order things and the boxes come in, this is where we go. We also call this the processing room sometimes, because when we order a book for the library, we get a box just like you would get at home. If you place an order for something and it comes to your doorstep, you open up that box and you've got something new. You've got some books, you've got something fun. We do the same thing. We order our books, we get them in a big old box, UPS drives them up here, and we have got brand new books. They look just like your books when you get them at home. There is nothing special that says, hey, this is a library book. But we need to change that, don't we? We don't want our books going out and then you take it home and it looks just like your books. So what we do here is we have a team who processes the books. This is where they get stickers. We have our special barcode that tells us it's our book and it tells us which book it is. They have what we call a spine label that tells us where to put it on the shelf. And once it's on the shelf, we check our computer and that tells us where on the shelf we should look to find that book. These books get all sorts of special little touches. We have a special little sticker for the inside that tells it is from the Ames Free Library. And once we get all those ready, this book isn't quite ready to go on the shelf. We still need to tell our computers what this book is. So at that point, we can scan that barcode and put in the information to say, this number is for Grandpa's favorite. And then, once our computer's ready to go, this book can go on the shelf. And that is where you come in, and you can find it and check it out and take it home. This is the space we call the book drop room, because guess what? This is the book drop right here. When you are outside and you are coming into the library, you have some books that you want to return, there's that cool little flap on the outside. You can lift it right up, and you put your books in there. What happens to them? Well, let me show you. Once you slide your book in that book drop, it comes down this really cool ramp and pops right into the cart right here. Now that is, it's nice and soft in here, it's cushioned, so the books have a nice gentle landing when they come in. So once the books are returned, they land in this cart. We have to scoop them up and put them in a bin, and then we take them over to our computers to get those checked out again. Another library mystery solved. Down here at the front of the library is our circulation department. This is where you can get a library card. Kiddos, if you don't have a library card, I highly recommend you come in with mom or dad. You can get your card right here once we're all open again. Just takes a few minutes. This is where you check out your books. So once you've been to visit me up in the children's room, you can bring your books right down here and they will get them all checked out for you to take home. And this is of course also where you return your books when you bring them back. If there's a particular book you've been looking for and you put a hold on it, you've been waiting and waiting and waiting for that book to come in, when that hold is available, that's going to be just down here on our hold shelves also. So the circulation desk is kind of like the heart of this library where all the action happens. Thank you all for joining me on our tour of the Ames Free Library. First graders, I hope you've enjoyed your virtual field trip. Everyone else, this is a nice little peek into some of those secret parts you might not know about. Anyone who's interested in more information on the history of the library, the Ames family, or anything else, please feel free to email info@amesfreelibrary.org. We hope we'll be seeing you back here soon. Bye!